The snow in Anchorage that morning wasn't sticking yet, but the air had a bite to it that went straight through my old Army jacket. I'd made the 42-mile drive from Palmer in my '98 Silverado because my son Josh had asked me to. "Just need a ladder and your steady hands, Dad," he'd said on the phone 3 nights ago, his voice light, familiar. It was our thing. I hadn't missed a Christmas with him since I came back from Desert Storm. Not when I was stationed in Germany. Not when his mother passed. Not even when I had a shattered hip and needed a cane to walk. But that morning, standing on his perfectly shoveled driveway surrounded by inflatable reindeer and gleaming lights, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Alaska winter. He didn't offer me coffee. He didn't even ask me to come inside. He just stood there in the doorway, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a designer jacket I'd never seen before, shifting his weight like a nervous recruit. "Dad," he began, not quite meeting my eye, "I'm going to say this straight. This year, you're not expected for Christmas." The word hit me like a well-aimed round. Expected. It wasn't "you're not invited." It wasn't even a pleading, "please understand." It was a cold corporate term, a logistical update, like I was a retired contractor whose services were no longer required. I looked past him. Inside, his wife, Sarah, moved through their gleaming kitchen, pulling a roast from the oven. She didn't look up. My grandson's tiny boots, the ones I'd special ordered from a tactical gear site, because he wanted to be like Grandpa, were lined up neatly by the fireplace. I kept my voice level, a skill honed over 22 years of service. "Something," I said, "Josh." He sighed, a sound of profound inconvenience. "It's not about you, Dad. Sarah's parents are flying in from Seattle this year. They ... They have their own traditions." "Traditions," I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "Look, maybe we can do something the day after. Brunch or whatever." Brunch. I hadn't driven through black ice and packed my old extension ladder for brunch. But I smiled. The way a soldier smiles when he's outranked, but not outhought. "Understood," I said. I turned my back on my only son, on the house I'd helped him buy, and walked to my truck dot. The engine turned over with a reliable grumble. Bye. The time I reached the stop sign at the end of his picture-perfect street, the fog on my windshield had cleared. But something much colder had settled deep behind my ribcage. I didn't turn on the radio. I drove in silence, accompanied only by the hum of the heater and the echo of his words. Not expected. 4 years ago, Josh and Sarah were living in a 2-bedroom duplex, drowning in medical debt. He'd called me, his voice cracking. "Dad, I've got a shot at a VA-backed loan, but my credit's shot. Can you help?" I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask questions. That's what fathers do. I co-signed the mortgage, fronted $30,000 from my military pension for the down payment, and had been covering the $1,875 monthly payment ever since. It was automatically deducted from my account on the first of every month, as reliable as the sunrise. My VA benefits went in. Their house payment came out. They had built a life, just high enough to forget who poured the foundation. I pulled into the driveway of my own modest 2-bedroom near Vasilla. The paint was peeling. The roof needed patching. I hadn't updated the carpet since 2003. Inside, I hung my jacket on its usual hook and sat at the kitchen table. My old Army duffel bag, still unpacked from Thanksgiving weekend, sat in the corner. My eyes fell on the photo stuck to the fridge. Josh in his graduation cap, grinning. His mother, my Maria, holding his diploma like it was gold. Me beside them, still in uniform. We looked like a family. A real one. I reached for a folder I hadn't opened in months. Mortgage records, transfer statements, loan agreements. The boring, brutal paperwork of life that no one looks at until something breaks. Well, something had broken. At 11:42 a.m., I called the bank. A woman answered with trained warmth. "Mr. Carver, how can we help you today?" "I need to cancel a standing." "Payment, certainly. May I have the account number?" I read it off without having to look. The Army trains you to remember numbers. They are life. Recurring mortgage payment to Wells Fargo, $1,875 monthly. Is that correct? That's the one. And would you like this paused or canceled entirely? I looked out my window. The snow was finally starting to fall slow, methodical, like a blanket, being shaken out over the valley. "Canceled," I said, my voice firm, "effective immediately." There was a pause on her end. A slight intake of breath. "Understood. That has been processed. Is there anything else we can do for you?" "No, ma'am," I said. "That's everything." I hung up the phone. The silence in my kitchen was absolute. For the first time in 4 years, my monthly budget would balance. For the first time since Maria passed, I could fix the water heater, buy new tires, refill the propane tank without a knot of stress in my stomach. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was a correction. The first clean, surgical strike in a war. They didn't even know we were fighting. They didn't expect me for Christmas. Fine. But they should have known. You don't exclude the man who holds the mortgage and expect the walls to stand forever. The silence in my house that first night was different. It wasn't the empty silence of loneliness I'd known since Maria passed. This was a purposeful silence, a tactical silence. The kind you maintain after setting a perimeter, waiting to see what moves in the dark. I didn't eat dinner. I wasn't hungry. I poured a cup of black coffee, let it go cold on the table, and opened the manila folder. Under the dim kitchen light, I began my own audit. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about intelligence. I needed to understand the full battlefield. I created a new section in the folder. I labeled it simply, the cost. With a yellow legal pad. I started writing dates, amounts, descriptions. Asterisk March 17th. Down payment wired, $30,000 asterisk April 3rd. First automatic mortgage withdrawal, $1,875 asterisk July 10th. Roof repair after hail damage, $4,200 asterisk October 14th. Emergency furnace repair, $3,800 asterisk December 5th. Unexpected property tax shortfall, $1,200 asterisk. The list grew. It wasn't just the mortgage. It was the 1,000 cuts of their financial dependence. The "can you just help us this once?" That became a monthly ritual. The private school uniforms for my grandson Ben. The new tires for Sarah's SUV so she could safely drive in the snow. I'd paid for it all, without question, because that's what you do for family. I looked at the total I'd scribbled at the bottom of the page. A number so large it felt abstract. But it wasn't abstract. It was my pension. It was my security. It was the life I'd put on hold for them. My phone buzzed on the table. A text message lit up the dim kitchen. It was from Sarah. You canceled the mortgage transfer? I'm assuming this is temporary. Can we talk? No. Hi, Dennis. No, Dad. No apology. Just a demand wrapped in a question. A system alert from a bank account that had just gone offline. I stared at the screen. The blue light reflected in my glasses. I didn't pick it up. I didn't type a reply. I let the message sit there. Unread. Let her wonder. Let her feel the first chill of uncertainty. The next morning, I woke at 06:00. No alarm. The Army doesn't let you forget that rhythm. I made coffee, the sharp, bitter brew I'd learned to love in countless motor pools before dawn. I sat by the window and watched the sun struggle to rise over the frozen landscape. My phone rang at 10:17. Josh. I let it ring twice, then picked up. Dad. His voice was tight, a frayed wire. Sarah told me what you did. I waited. Let the silence stretch. You canceled the house payment. He said it like an accusation, like I'd kicked a dog. I said nothing. I thought maybe it was a mistake, a warning. No, Josh, I said, my voice flat, devoid of the warmth he expected. It was a correction. He fell silent. I could almost hear the calculations running behind his eyes. The panic starting to bubble up. I've been paying your mortgage, your furnace, your furniture, and your son's school fees for 4 years. I stated, reciting facts, not grievances. You told me I wasn't expected for Christmas. That's fine. But from now on, I'm also not expected to subsidize your life. Dad, you know we're in a tight spot. The whine in his voice was new, a child's complaint. You've been in a tight spot for a decade, son. That's not my emergency anymore. That's not fair. No, I agreed, my voice dropping to a low, cold register. What's not fair is taking money from a man you no longer want at your table. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. I could hear Sarah talking in the background, her voice a frantic, muffled whisper. I didn't want this to become a fight, he said finally, deflating. It's not a fight, Josh, I replied. A fight would require us to be on the same battlefield. Right now, you're in a house I paid for. I'm sitting in a cold kitchen, looking at a stack of bills for a roof I can't afford to fix. He had no answer for that. The truth, laid bare, is a weapon against which there is no defense. Sarah's parents. They just have higher expectations, he mumbled. A weak, pathetic excuse. That word again. Expectations. As if I just walked out of the woods and tracked mud onto their pristine white carpets. I hope they meet them, I said, and ended. The call. I didn't slam the phone down. I placed it gently on the table. Precision, not anger. The rest of the day was quiet. I didn't brood. I worked. I went into the garage and pulled the tarp off my old footlocker, the one that had followed me from Kuwait to Bosnia to Fort Bragg. Inside, beneath my old uniform and dog tags, was a battered green notebook, my deployment journal. Half in code, half in memories. Notes on terrain, on patterns, on how to track an enemy's movement. I'd been a soldier for 22 years. For the past decade, I'd tried to forget that part of me. I'd traded battle plans for birthday cards, combat boots for slippers. But my son's words on that doorstep had reminded me. A good soldier doesn't just fight. He studies. He prepares. He gathers intelligence. And when the time is right, he moves with absolute precision. I closed the footlocker. The war wasn't loud. It wasn't angry, Doc. It was quiet. It was calculated, and I had just begun to mobilize. The silence after Josh's call was a victory in itself. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't pleaded. I'd stated facts, simple and unassailable, and then I'd hung up. I left them in the void of their own making, a void suddenly devoid. Of my monthly financial oxygen. I knew their next move before they even made it. Panicked people are predictable. When they can't control the money, they try to control the narrative. They attack the source. The first shot across my bow came not from Josh, but from Sarah. A text sent later that night. Dennis, we're worried about you. This isn't like you. This feels unstable. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Evans about this? There. It was. The dagger, thinly disguised as concern. Unstable. They couldn't argue with the math, so they would attack the mathematician. They wanted to pathologize my clarity, to turn my justified correction into a symptom of mental decline. I didn't respond. A soldier doesn't engage with propaganda. He gathers it as intelligence. I took a screenshot of the message and filed it away in the new digital folder I'd created. Projection. The main assault came the next morning. My landline rang a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A woman's voice, clipped and professionally polite, filled the quiet room. Mr. Carver, my name is Dana Withers. I'm a journalist with the Anchorage Daily News. I was hoping to speak with you regarding a story we're preparing on elder isolation and financial exploitation during the holidays. Your name was mentioned. Please call me back. Mentioned by whom? I didn't need to ask. It was a classic tactic. Leak a story to the press. Frame me as a confused, isolated old man making rash decisions. They were trying to paint a target on my back, using sympathy as the brush. Instead of anger, I felt a cold, focused calm. They were bringing a spoon to a gunfight. I called her back, not to defend myself, but to assess the terrain, to gather intelligence. On my enemy's position, Dana Withers. Ms. Withers, Dennis Carver, you called about a story. She sounded young, sharp. Yes, Mr. Carver. Thank you for calling back. I want to be respectful of your time. I received a tip from a concerned family member. A Catherine Jenkins? She expressed worry that you may be experiencing some cognitive stress, that recent decisions regarding family finances were made under duress. Catherine, Sarah's mother, the architect of higher expectations. Of course, she provided me with a copy of a canceled mortgage transfer. Donna continued. Is this a profile piece, Ms. Withers? I asked, my voice flat. Or an ambush? A pause on the other end. A good journalist hates being read so easily. To be honest, it was pitched as the former. But my job is to dig. I have questions. Ask them. And she did. I answered with the dispassionate clarity of an after-action report. 22 years of service. No debt. No criminal record. No history of cognitive issues. And yes, I had voluntarily covered a mortgage and significant living expenses for my son's family for nearly 5 years. The payments were canceled after. I was explicitly told my presence was not expected for the holiday. The line was silent for a long moment. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. She was fact-checking in real time, and my story was checking out. Would you be willing to provide documentation to support that timeline? She finally asked, her tone shifting from skeptical to intrigued. A small, cold smile touched my lips. I already have a folder prepared. We met at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop downtown. I wore a pressed flannel and clean jeans. I was shaved. I looked exactly like what I was, sane, clear-eyed, and dangerous if pushed. I slid the folder across the table. She opened it and began to read. Her eyes scanned the highlighted bank statements, the printed transfer receipts, the photos of their lavish holiday decorations I'd taken from the street just that morning. You co-signed the house? She asked, not looking up. Yes. And they told you not to come for Christmas. They said I wasn't expected. I corrected softly. She winced. That's worse. By Thursday, the story broke. Not on the front page, but in the Metro section. The headline was a masterpiece of understated damning. A forgotten contributor, one veteran's quiet Christmas. It was factual. Reverent. Even. The photo showed me in profile at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee in my hand. I'd asked her not to include Maria's picture in the frame, and she'd honored that. The article didn't name Josh or Sarah, but it didn't have to. The details were a roadmap for anyone in Anchorage who knew them. The digital comment section erupted by lunchtime. God bless this man. My dad went through the same thing. Sarah Jenkins is still posting pics of her humble holiday? Yikes. This generation needs to learn the meaning of respect. I didn't read the comments. I didn't need to. The effect was instantaneous. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Josh, Sarah, then a number I didn't recognize, probably Catherine, then another. I let them all go to voicemail. The final call of the day I picked up. Dennis. The voice was older, condescending, dripping with a banker's faux authority. Cody Jenkins, Sarah's father. The mastermind. Cody, I said calmly, to what do I owe the honor? You need to retract that article. I didn't write it. You gave her the information. He snapped, his composure cracking. I gave her the truth. He inhaled sharply. You're embarrassing my family. Then maybe your family should try less embarrassing behavior. The line went silent for a beat. This will have consequences. He hissed. I actually laughed. A short, humorless sound. You're talking to a man who watched a convoy burn in Fallujah. You think I'm afraid of gossip in the Anchorage Daily News? You're playing a dangerous game, old man. I leaned back in my chair, the brass compass from my father feeling heavy in my pocket. No, Cody, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. I'm just finally keeping score. I ended the call. That night, I drove by their house. Not to stalk, to observe. The lights were off. The yard, usually an obnoxious spectacle of inflatable reindeer and fake snowmen, was dark and bare. The silence from the house was deafening. They were running scared. The ghost they'd tried to erase had just learned how to write. And my first editorial had landed right on their front porch. December 24th, 6:41 p.m. Anchorage was wrapped in a deep, hushed silence, the kind that only comes when a thick blanket of snow falls on a world holding its breath. I stood across the street from their house, the engine of my Silverado off. Lights dimmed. They had gone all out. Golden lights traced every gutter and window frame. Luminous reindeer flanked the walkway like silent sentinels guarding a palace. It was a picture-perfect scene of suburban holiday bliss. Through the frost-lined windows, I saw silhouettes moving, 12 of them. Guests in elegant dress, wine glasses in hand. Laughter, muffled by the glass and the snow, spilled out into the cold night. A Christmas dinner. Their curated life was on full display, and not a single person in that room knew who had paid for every inch of it. On the passenger seat of my truck sat a briefcase. Not leather, a simple, hard-sided aluminum case. Inside were 12 identical packets. Each one was a story. My story. Neatly organized printed bank statements, photos of renovation receipts with my name on them, a copy of the Anchorage Daily. News article, annotated in steady red ink. And the centerpiece, a screenshot of Sarah's post from just 2 days ago. Feeling grateful this Christmas. Everything we have we earned together. A lie so polished it gleamed, I stepped out of the truck. The cold air was a shock, but it felt clean. I adjusted the collar of my old Navy peacoat, the one I'd had since my days stationed in Norfolk, and walked toward the house. I'd financed, but was never welcome in. They'd left the door unlocked. Of course they had. Safe neighborhoods. Don't expect intrusions from the man who built them. I let myself in. The warmth hit me first, a wave of heat. Cinnamon, expensive perfume, and roasting meat. Then came the hush. The exact moment a room full of privileged, comfortable people senses a fundamental shift in the atmosphere. 12 faces turned toward me. Some curious, some mildly annoyed at the draft. Josh and Sarah went completely white, their expressions frozen in pure, undiluted horror. Dennis? Sarah's voice was a shrill, panicked crack in the festive air. What are you doing here? Josh rose from the head of the table, his linen napkin fluttering from his hand to the floor. Dad, I held up one hand, not to silence them, but to signal that I was not here for chaos. I was here for clarity. My movement was calm, deliberate. A soldier on a mission. I won't stay long, I said, my voice low but carrying perfectly in the stunned silence. But since I wasn't expected for dinner, I figured I'd at least drop off a few gifts. I moved around the long table, slowly, placing a packet in front of each guest. The clack of the aluminum briefcase opening and closing was the only sound. No one moved. No one spoke. Sarah's mother, Catherine, reached for hers with trembling, perfectly manicured fingers. She was the queen of this particular court, the champion of etiquette and control. Her eyes scanned the top line of the first bank statement. Her face, usually a mask of placid superiority, crumpled as if she'd been physically slapped. "You came here to humiliate us." Erin spat, her voice trembling with a rage she could no longer contain. "No," I said, my voice still quiet, lethally calm. "I came here to correct the record." A man at the table, mid-50s with a heavy blazer and gold cufflinks, cleared his throat. He was holding up the bank statement. "These documents. They say you paid the mortgage for this house. Every month. For 4 years." I nodded once. "Plus the down payment. The renovations. The kitchen appliances. The granite countertops you're eating your dinner off of. My visa." Another guest, a woman with a kind face, looked up, her eyes wide. "Wait, you're the one from that article in the paper?" I turned, my gaze to her. "Yes, ma'am, I am." The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. Catherine found her voice, though it was strained and brittle. "This is wildly inappropriate, Dennis. You're disrupting a family gathering." I offered her a small, cold smile. "That's interesting, considering I was told I wasn't family anymore." Sarah stood up, her composure shattered. "We didn't ask you for all that." "You offered. You wanted to help." "Correct," I said, my tone never shifting from its calm, factual cadence. "I offered because I believed family took care of each other. I paid month after month because I trusted that one day I'd be allowed a seat at this table." I paused, letting the weight of the words settle on everyone in the room. I was wrong. Someone at the far end of the table whispered, "Jesus Christ." Josh looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. I turned my focus to him. "I'm not angry at you, Josh. I'm disappointed. You're my son. You had a father who would have given you everything. And did. And you traded that for candlelight and white linen with people who never lifted a finger for you." He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "You're ruining our reputation." Sarah cried, her voice breaking. "No," I cut in, my voice sharpening for the first time. "You ruined it when you lied to every single person at this table. When you let them believe this house, this lifestyle, this performance was yours." A younger woman, someone I didn't recognize, finally spoke up, her voice soft but clear. She was looking at Josh, her expression confused. "I thought you were a retired major. You never mentioned your father paid for all this." "Because he's ashamed," I said simply. Ashamed that the man he shut out was also the man who kept the lights on. Catherine stood now, her face hard. "Dennis, if you don't leave, I'll be forced to involve the authorities." "The press." "The press already has the story, Catherine," I said. "And next week they get the follow-up, with names." Her mouth clamped shut into a thin, bloodless line. I saw it then, across the table. A guest, a man who'd been silent until now, closed his packet deliberately. He looked directly at me, his eyes holding not pity, but respect. "Thank you for your service, sir," he said. That was enough. I stepped back, picked up my now empty briefcase, and turned toward the front door. "I won't be seeing you again," I said over my shoulder, my voice filling the utterly silent room. "But I hope one day you'll see yourselves." The last thing I heard before the door clicked shut behind me was the sound of Sarah bursting into ragged, hysterical tears. The second to last thing was a man's voice, low and clear, near the window. "They're going to lose everything." I walked back to my truck, my boots crunching in the snow. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt finished, not with my son, not with my past, but with the role they had assigned me, the invisible benefactor, the quiet ATM. I had removed the mask. Now they had to sit in the mirror. The silence after the Christmas dinner was different. It wasn't the tense silence of waiting or the strategic silence of planning. It was the deep, hollow silence of a battlefield after the fighting is done. The smoke clears, and you're left to survey the damage. 3 days passed. I didn't answer a single call. I didn't listen to the voicemails piling up. The discipline of silence was my armor. It was the same stillness I'd learned decades ago, the kind that comes after a clean shot, when you wait for the dust to settle and the truth to echo through what's left. On the third morning, I found a certified envelope wedged in my mailbox, rubber banded to the screen door. It was thick, official. Notice of default. Amount past due, $11,250. Lender, Wells Fargo Mortgage Division. Action required within 14 days to avoid foreclosure proceedings. I read it slowly, twice. 3 months of unpaid mortgage. The same payments I'd covered automatically for years. Without thanks, without reminder. The safety net I'd provided was gone, and they were in free fall. I placed the envelope on my kitchen counter. I didn't open it further. I didn't gloat. I just poured a second cup of coffee and sat by the window, listening to the old heater click to life. The air in my home, though drafty and worn, felt lighter. It finally belonged to me again. The knock came at 6:08 p.m. It wasn't a confident rap. It was hesitant, unsure. I opened the door. Josh stood on the porch. The man who faced me was a ghost of the one I'd seen on his doorstep weeks ago. Wind-chapped cheeks, deep circles under his eyes. His shoulders slumped under the weight of a reality he could no longer ignore. "Dad," he said, the word barely a whisper. I didn't speak. I simply stepped aside. He walked in, his eyes scanning the living room like he was seeing it for the first time. He noticed the repaired cabinet door, the newly oiled floorboards. Quiet, unpretentious stability of the place. "This place looks good," he said, his voice hollow. "It's what happens when you stop giving your entire paycheck to people who don't respect you." I replied, my tone flat, factual. He flinched as if I'd struck him. We sat at the old kitchen table. The silence was heavy, but it was real. Not a weapon, just a space. "I saw the letter," he said finally. "It's bad." I nodded. Double quotes, we single quotes, V. Fallen behind. He caught himself, shame flooding his features. "I mean, I did. I just didn't want to see it." I let him talk. Let him sit in the uncomfortable truth. "It's foreclosure now," he continued, his voice cracking. "Sarah's been a mess. Her parents left early. Catherine won't even speak to her. Smart woman," I muttered. "Dad, I know you're angry. I know you feel—" "I don't feel anything," I interrupted, my voice quiet but absolute. "Not anymore." The words landed harder than any shout could have. Josh looked down at his hands. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. His handwriting was messy, the math rushed, but the numbers were there. $226,875, he said, his voice thick. "Down payment, mortgage, repairs, utilities, school supplies, Christmases. You kept track of all this?" I shook my head. "I didn't, but I remembered where to look. Your old emails, the bank deposits." I pieced it together. I set the paper down. "You missed a few." He nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. I figured, but it's enough to see it. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and I saw the boy he used to be, buried under years of poor choices and weaker character. "I chose them over you, and they're gone or turning on us. And I'm standing here, wondering how I ever let it get this far." I stayed silent. Sarah keeps saying, "We need you to bail us out. That's your family. That's your duty." He took a shaky breath. And I finally said, ... No. That caught my attention. I told her the man who paid our bills for 5 years, without complaint, didn't owe us a damn thing. That maybe we owed him everything. And what did she say to that? I asked. She cried, he said, his voice empty. Then she packed a bag. The silence that followed was different. He wasn't here for money. He was here for something else. Something that couldn't be bought or paid for. "Dad," he said, his voice small and broken, "do you think we'll ever be okay again?" I took a long breath. I walked to the mantel and picked up the photo of Maria, then the picture of Ben wearing my army cap. "We're not going back," I said, my voice softer than it had been in weeks. "But we might go forward." He looked up, a flicker of something hope in his red-rimmed eyes. "If you want a relationship," I continued, "you'll have to build it, brick by brick. Not with money, with respect, with presence, with truth." He nodded, fresh tears welling up. "And the mortgage?" he asked quietly, the heart of his fear finally laid bare. "Not my problem," I said. "But maybe now, finally, you'll figure out how to solve it yourself." When he left, I stood on the porch and watched him walk to his car. No hugging, no false goodbyes. But halfway down the driveway, he turned. "Dad?" he called out, his breath fogging in the cold hair. "I was proud of you. The way you stood up for yourself. I didn't say anything, but I not a dot that was enough dot inside. I turned off the porch light. I sat by the fire, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that this wasn't about revenge. It was a rescue. A rescue from a life where I'd traded my worth for silence. And a rescue for a son who was finally, painfully, learning what a father's love was really supposed to look like. The call came just before 10 p.m. I let it ring 4 times. Not out of hesitation, but out of intention. Let her wait. Let her wonder. Then I picked up. "Dennis." Sarah's voice was breathless, forced, like she'd rehearsed sincerity. In a mirror. I didn't know who else to call. I said nothing. I don't even know where to start. She filled the silence herself, a tactic that had always worked on Josh. "The house is under review for foreclosure. Josh says you won't help. He says you're done." I remained silent, letting the void on the line stretch until it became uncomfortable. "I just think we need to sit down and talk this through," she pleaded, her voice tightening. "For the kids, the kids." The phrase dangled like a prop, something to lean on when everything else collapsed. I took a calm, steady breath. "Erin," I said, deliberately using her given name, the one she'd left behind for something she thought sounded more refined. "There's nothing to talk through. You don't understand." She insisted, a note of desperation creeping in. "I understand perfectly. You're being dramatic. You said my food was too spicy." I stated, my voice flat, my conversation was too simple. That I wasn't fit to sit at your holiday table. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was clarity, yours. She faltered. "Okay, fine. Maybe things were said. But that doesn't undo years of support. Of family. The kids think the world of you. Are you going to throw that away?" "I'm not throwing anything away," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "I'm just done carrying what was never mine to carry." A long pause, then came the pivot. Her voice turned cold, calculated. "Well, you should know Cody and I have spoken to an attorney. He thinks we may have grounds to argue that the mortgage payments were a form of implied gift, that you were willingly contributing as a legal party." I almost laughed. "You're threatening to sue me?" "I'm informing you," she said, the rehearsed line falling flat, "that if this becomes a matter of legal action, your presence And our finances may not look as distant as you think. I stood up, walked to my filing cabinet, and pulled out a thin envelope I'd prepared days ago. "Aaron," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "would you like the name of my attorney? He's expecting a call. He has copies of every transfer, every receipt, every tax return proving the house was never in my name, that I was never legally liable." She swallowed. I could hear it through the line. "He also has a statement I prepared," I continued, in case this got ugly. "A timeline of emotional manipulation, public exclusion, and financial abuse." "You're bluffing," she whispered, but the certainty was gone from her voice. "Do I sound like a man who bluffs?" The line went so quiet I could hear my own clock ticking on the wall. Then her voice softened into that syrupy tone she used when asking for money. "Dennis, I didn't mean for this to go this far. It went as far as you pushed it." She sighed, a dramatic, performative sound. "I'm scared. We might lose the house." "I lost my wife," I said. "I know. No, you don't." She had no reply. I lowered my voice to a cold, precise whisper. "You lost a house. I lost dignity, time, years of being spoken to like I was the hired help. And now you want empathy." I let that hang in the dead air between us. "Aaron, I'm not angry with you anymore, but I will never trust you again. And I will never pay for your comfort at the cost of my self-respect." Then I hung up. I sat back down, my hands steady. The war was over. There would be no lawsuits, no more threats. People like her fight for appearances, not truth. And the truth doesn't flinch. Letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon. No return address, just my name in blocky, childish handwriting across the envelope. I opened it carefully. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper. At the top, in blue crayon, was a drawing. A man in a green jacket standing beside a truck. Next to him, a boy, arms wide open. Above them, 3 words, "Me and Grandpa." Underneath, a short message was written in pencil, the letters large and carefully formed. "I miss you. Thank you for my boots. I wore them to school. People said I looked strong. Merry Christmas. Ben. I sat with that letter in my hands for a long time. This wasn't a plea. It wasn't a guilt trip. It was a message from a boy who still remembered. Where strength comes from, Aaron could manipulate. Josh could disappoint. But Ben remembered, and that meant not everything was lost. I walked to my office, found a clean envelope, and wrote back, "Dear Ben, thank you for your letter." I got it on a snowy Thursday, and it made the whole house feel warmer. I still have the photo of us on the mantel, the one where you wore my army hat sideways. You looked the part. Take care of your boots. Clean them after it rains, and walk tall in them. Merry Christmas, Soldier. Grandpa Dennis. I didn't tell him about the foreclosure or his mother's calls. He didn't need that. He just needed to know that his roots hadn't rotted. 3 days later, another envelope arrived. Inside was a photograph. Ben standing next to a snowman, his boots laced high. He was saluting, sloppily, proudly. Behind him, taped to the siding of the house, was a hand-painted sign. The letters were uneven. The paint dripped, but the message was clear. Grandpa built this house. I choked on nothing, just air and memory. That night, I sat on my porch. The cold didn't bite like it used to. Something had shifted. The war was done. The cleanup had started. I pulled out an old ammo box I'd kept since my days in Germany. Empty, clean, sturdy. I began to fill it, my field compass. A letter Maria had written to Josh before his first day of school. A laminated photo of me in uniform, 1987. And Ben's drawing. This wasn't a gift. It was a time capsule of truth. I'd give it to him when the time was right. Because when boys like Ben grow up, they deserve more than stories filtered through bitterness. They deserve the full map. The final piece of the story didn't come with a knock or a letter. It came in the form of a bank statement I'd requested. There, listed under recent transactions, was a single small deposit into a new custodial account in Ben's name. The trustee, Joshua Carver. The amount, $1,500. Not much, but it was clean. Legitimate. Initiated. It was a signal. A small one, but real. I didn't know what to feel. Not pride, not forgiveness, just a pause. For once, Josh wasn't reacting. He was initiating. Not to impress me, but because maybe, just maybe, something had finally cracked through the varnish of his adulthood. That evening, I lit a fire. I opened the folder one last time, the paper trail, the war file, the proof. Then I placed it in the fireplace and watched it burn. The flames consumed the anger, the hurt, the numbers, leaving only ashes. Not because I forgave everyone, not because I forgot, but because I didn't need to carry it anymore. The war was over. I had not just survived. I had secured the future. My legacy would not be a bank statement. It would be a boy who knew how to salute, who owned a pair of strong boots, and who knew, deep in his bones, that his grandpa had built something that could never be foreclosed on. Spring came late to Alaska that year, but it came. The snow retreated, revealing the stubborn earth beneath. My days fell into a new rhythm, one not dictated by bank transfer dates or the hope of an invitation. The silence from Josh and Sarah's direction was no longer a tense standoff. It was a settled fact. The foreclosure notice had been finalized. The for sale sign on their lawn, once a symbol of my vengeance, now just looked like what it was, a consequence. I felt no pleasure in it, only a dull, distant ache for the city life my son had chosen and lost. My focus turned inward to my own land, my own home. The peeling paint, the patched roof, the 2003 carpet, they were no longer symbols of neglect, but a to-do list. A future to be built with my own two hands. I was on the porch, sanding down a warped windowsill, when a rental sedan I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. The door opened, and Sarah stepped out. She looked different. No designer coat, no sharp, polished edges. She wore a simple jacket and jeans, and her face was free of the makeup she usually wore like armor. She looked ordinary, and for the first time, unguarded. That was the most dangerous kind. I didn't stop sanding. The rhythmic scrape of grit on wood filled the space between us. "Dennis," she said, her voice barely carrying over the sound. "Can I come in?" I looked up, squinting in the afternoon sun. I didn't answer. I just gave a slight nod toward the door and went back to my work. She walked inside, her steps hesitant on the familiar, worn floorboards. I finished the section I was on, wiped my hands on my pants, and followed her in. She stood in the middle of the living room, not touching anything, just looking. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the palpable peace, the lived-in comfort. They finally landed on the mantel, on Maria's photo, on the picture of Ben in my army cap, on the crayon drawing taped beside it. "We're moving," she said abruptly, not looking at me. "Back to Portland. My parents, I need a reset." I didn't ask who the reset was for. I remained silent, leaning against the doorframe. "I wanted to look you in the eye," she continued, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "To say I'm sorry I waited. I was wrong about you," she said, the words seeming to cost her something. "About a lot of things. I let pride and appearances get in the way of decency. I thought control was the same thing as respect." That one landed. I gave a single, slow nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. She took a breath, steeling herself. I came here thinking maybe you'd want to say something too. I already did, I said, my voice calm. At your Christmas dinner. That wasn't a conversation. No, I agreed. It was a reckoning. The room went still. She absorbed the word, and for a moment I saw the girl she might have been before she learned. To curate her life, a little scared, a little uncertain. Do you hate me? She asked, the question small and stark in the quiet room. I met her gaze. No, but I don't trust you. And I don't welcome you. The control on her face slipped for a second. A flash of anger, but she caught it. I deserve that. You deserve truth, I replied. And the truth is, you don't get to show up after the damage and ask for redemption. You have to rebuild trust. Brick by brick. She nodded, her throat working. Then her eyes flickered to Ben's drawing. I was hoping. Maybe we could talk about Ben, coordinate. Keep things consistent for him. And there it was, her angle. She wasn't here for me. She was here to negotiate access, to control the narrative of my relationship with my grandson. Ben is welcome here any time, I said, my voice leaving no room for debate. I meant, she pressed, maybe you and I could agree on boundaries, so he understands unity. Unity? The word was so hollow it almost echoed. You spent 5 years painting me out of the family portrait. Now you want me to color inside your lawns? Her face flushed with familiar frustration. You don't have to be cruel. I'm not. Cruel would have been silence. This is just clarity. She held my gaze for a long moment, and I saw the exact moment she realized she had no leverage left. No money. No moral high ground, no control. Just the consequences of her choices. She nodded once, a sharp, defeated motion. Okay. She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. One day, she said, not turning around, you'll see I was trying my best. I looked at her, at the lonely figure she cut in my doorway. I hope that comforts you, I said, and then she was gone. The door clicked shut. Not a slam, not a statement. Just an exit. I stood there for a minute, then walked to the mantel. I straightened Maria's picture and ran my thumb over the edge of the frame. I handled it, I whispered to her. You'd have done it quieter, I know, but I handled it. The following weekend, the sound of an engine I recognized pulled me from the garden. Josh's old Jeep. My heart tightened, a reflex I couldn't control. But it wasn't Josh who got out. It was Ben. He carried a small backpack and walked toward me with a determined look that was so unlike his father's uncertainty. Dad dropped me off, he said by way of greeting. Said I could stay till Sunday if that's okay. I nodded, wiping the dirt from my hands on my jeans. It's okay. He followed me inside, dropped his bag, and looked around. Can I help? With the garden? We spent the afternoon turning the soil. He didn't talk much, but he worked hard, his small hands mimicking mine. It was in the quiet, repetitive work that he finally spoke. Mom said we're moving. She said it's for the best. I kept digging, not looking at him. What do you think? He was quiet for a long time. I think I'll miss my room, but I won't miss the big dinners where everyone talked fake. I stopped digging and looked at him. The simple, brutal honesty of a child. Later, as we sat on the porch with glasses of lemonade, he looked at me. Will you still be here when I come back to visit? I looked out at my land, at the house I was fixing with my own hands, at the garden we just planted together. I'm not going anywhere, son, I said, and for the first time, I knew it was true. I wasn't waiting for an invitation anymore. I wasn't funding a life I wasn't part of. I was building my own. A life that was quiet and real and mine. The war was over. There were no victors, only survivors. But in the fertile soil of the aftermath, Something new was taking root. Not a family as it was, but something that could be. Built slowly, honestly, brick by brick, thought it was enough. The summer sun in Alaska is a patient guest. It lingers, warming the soil that had been frozen for so long. I found my rhythm in that endless light. The rhythm of sanding wood, of planting seeds, of silence that was no longer empty, but full of purpose. The phone didn't ring anymore. The certified letters stopped coming. The war was not just over. Its battlefields had been reclaimed by the peace of everyday life. I was rebuilding my home, not just the physical one with its patched roof and new paint, but the one inside me, the one they could never mortgage. One afternoon, I was in the garage, sorting through the last of Maria's things, a final box I hadn't been able to face before. It was mostly old books, but tucked beneath a worn copy of East of Eden was a small cloth-bound journal. Her journal. I sat on an old stool, the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams, and I opened it. Her handwriting, so familiar and so missed, flowed across the page. It wasn't a diary of daily events. It was a ledger of a different kind. Lists of Josh's first words, sketches of flowers from our garden. And on one page, near the end, a short entry dated just a few months before she passed. Dennis worries so much about providing, about being strong. I wish he could see that the greatest legacy isn't the money he leaves behind, but the memories he plants now. The simple ones, the taste of coffee on the porch, the smell of fresh-cut wood, the sound of his quiet voice reading to Josh. These are the things that outlast everything. These are the true investments. I closed the journal, my throat tight. She'd known. She'd always known the man I was beneath the uniform and the provider's burden. She'd seen the compass inside me long before I'd lost my way. A car. Door slammed outside, pulling me from the past. It wasn't the rental sedan or the Jeep. It was an older model truck, rusted at the edges. Josh got out. He didn't approach the house like he owned the place, or like a scared recruit. He just stood by his truck for a moment, as if gathering his courage. Then he walked toward the garage, his hands in his pockets. "Dad," he said, stopping at the entrance. I nodded, setting the journal aside. Josh. He looked around the garage, at the organized tools, the stacked wood, the clear space where chaos used to live. "Looks good in here." "It serves its purpose," I said. He shifted his weight, then gestured vaguely toward the road. I got a job, up on the North Slope. Maintenance work. It's a 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off rotation." I nodded again. It was hard work. Honest work. Good. I'm renting a small place in town for my off weeks. He took a deep breath. Ben's with Sarah in Portland for the school year, but the custody agreement, I get him all summer. Every summer. He looked at me then, and for the first time in years, I saw no blame, no expectation, no resentment in his eyes, just a tentative, fragile hope. I was wondering if it's okay, if he could stay with you sometimes, during my shifts. I don't like the idea of him being with a sitter in town. The request hung in the air between us. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a manipulation. It was a father, stripped bare of his pretenses, asking for help to do right by his son. I looked past him, to the garden where Ben and I had turned the soil. I thought of Maria's journal, the true investments. "He has a room here," I said, my voice rough. "Always has." The relief that washed over his face was so profound, it was almost painful to see. "Thank you, Dad." He turned to leave. Ben stopped. "He asks about you. All the time." "I know," I said. "He writes me." Josh nodded, a flicker of something regret, maybe, or understanding crossing his face. Then he got in his truck and drove away. The first day of summer. A cab pulled up. Ben climbed out, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, looking taller than I remembered. He didn't run to me. He walked up, nodded solemnly, and said, "I'm here, Grandpa." "I see that," I said. "You hungry?" "Always." "That?" "Summer, we didn't do anything extraordinary. We fixed a fence. We fished in the creek out back. We sat on the porch and drank lemonade. I taught him how to sharpen a knife, how to read a compass, how to be still and listen to the world around him. He didn't talk about Portland. He didn't talk about the house he'd lost. He talked about rocks, about birds, about the book he was reading. He was a kid again, not a pawn in an adult war. One evening, as we were cleaning the fish we'd caught, he looked up at me, his hands slick with scales. "Grandpa?" "Yeah, Ben? I'm glad this is my home, too." I stopped what I was doing. I looked at this boy with his serious eyes and his easy strength, and I felt the last of the coldness inside me melt away. Maria was right. This was the legacy. Not the money, not the property, not the battle. It was this. "Me too, kid," I said, my voice thick. "Me too." The seasons turned. Josh kept his job. He showed up when he said he would. He was quieter, more solid. The boy I'd raised was still in there, buried under years of bad choices, finally finding his way back to the surface. One fall day, he came over without Ben. He found me splitting wood out back. "I need to ask you something," he said, leaning against the stump I used as a block. I set them all down. "Ask." He looked out at the birch trees, their leaves blazing yellow against the clear blue sky. "I've been saving. It's not much, but I want to buy a piece of land. Nothing big, just a few acres. Maybe out near the valley." He finally looked at me. "I want to build a small cabin. For me and Ben. For when he's here." I studied him, the calluses on his hands, the new lines on his face, the earnestness in his eyes. He wasn't asking for money. He was asking for approval. "Do you know how to frame a wall?" I asked. "I can learn." "Do you know how to pour a foundation?" "I was hoping you could show me." I picked up the maul, hefted its familiar weight. "It's hard work." "I'm not afraid of hard work anymore." I swung the maul. The log split with a clean, satisfying crack. "We'll start on Saturday," I said. "Bring your gloves." He nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face, a real one, not the practiced grin he used to wear. "Thanks, Dad." As he walked back to his truck, I looked around. At my land, at my home, at the legacy that wasn't in a bank vault, but in the soil, in the timber, in the quiet understanding between generations. The compass inside me, which had spun for so long, was finally still, pointing true north. Not to the past, not to the hurt. But to the future, to the work that was left to do, to the boy who would one day own these woods, to the son who was finally building something of his own. The quiet man's revenge was complete. It wasn't in the downfall of his enemies. It was in the redemption of his family. Winter returned to Alaska, but it felt different this time. It wasn't a siege. It was a season. The snow fell and insulated the world in a respectful quiet, a blanket over a sleeping land. My land, the cabin project with Josh had stalled with. The freeze, a skeleton of raw timber and hope standing in a clearing near the valley. We'd framed the walls together in the long autumn light, the rhythm of hammers and saws a new language between us. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The work said everything. Ben's summer room in my house had become a permanent fixture. A backpack of school books by the door, a jar of river rocks on the windowsill. He was with Sarah in Portland for the school year, but the room waited for him. It was his anchor point in the world, and I was its keeper. One evening, a few weeks before Christmas, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of black coffee. The manila folder was gone, burned to ashes months ago. In its place was a simple, unfinished wooden box I was making from scrap lumber. A toolbox, not for tools, but for truths. I heard a car engine, the sound of tires crunching on the packed snow of my driveway. Not Josh's truck. This was a different sound. I didn't get up. I listened to the car door open and close, to footsteps. Approaching the porch, a single firm knock. I opened the door. Sarah stood there. The Alaska cold had pinkened her cheeks, and she looked older. The kind of aging that comes from living, not just from time. She held a large, flat package wrapped in brown paper. "Dennis," she said, her breath making a cloud in the air. "I'm not staying. I need to give you this." She held out the package. I took it. It was surprisingly light. "It's for Ben," she said, her eyes not quite meeting mine. "For when he's older. But I thought you should have it now." I nodded, waiting. Portland didn't. "It wasn't the reset I thought it would be," she said, the words coming out in a rush, as if she'd practiced them on the long drive. My parents' world is small. It's all about what things look like. I think I forgot that. I got lost in it." She finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw no calculation, no performance. Just a weary honesty. I was wrong, she said, the simplicity of it striking in the cold air. "About everything? I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that." I looked at the package in my hands and back at her. "He's a good kid, Sarah." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "I know. He talks about you, about the fishing, the cabin. He draws pictures of this place." She took a step back toward her car. "Tell him I love him." And then she was gone, her taillights disappearing into the twilight. I brought the package inside and laid it on the table. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a portrait. A beautiful, hand-painted watercolor of our family. But not the family we were, the family we had been. Maria, young and smiling, her hand on my shoulder. Me in my uniform, looking stern but with a light in my eyes I'd forgotten. Josh as a little boy, sitting on my lap, grinning with a gap-toothed smile. The background wasn't a studio. It was the old porch, the one Maria had loved. Sarah had painted it. The talent she'd put aside for dinner parties and social climbing was real. And she'd used it to give Ben back a piece of his history. A true piece, not a curated one. I leaned the portrait against the wall and went back to finishing the wooden box. I sanded the edges until they were smooth as bone. Then I began to fill it. I placed my father's brass compass inside, Maria's journal, Ben's first letter to me, the one with the crayon drawing, a photo of us fishing, and finally, a single key, the key to my house. This wasn't a will. It wasn't a legal document. It was a toolbox, a kit for building a life on a solid foundation, for knowing where you come from so you never get lost. On Christmas morning, the house was quiet. I made coffee and stood by the window. The snow was falling again, soft and relentless. I didn't feel alone. I felt surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the promises of the future, and they were all at peace. Headlights cut through the falling snow. Josh's truck. Both doors opened. Josh and Ben got out, trudging through the snow toward the porch, their breaths pluming in the cold air. Ben was carrying a clumsily wrapped present. I opened the door before they could knock. "Merry Christmas, Grandpa," Ben said, his face bright with the cold and excitement. "Merry Christmas," I said, stepping aside to let them in. Josh handed me a thermos. "Coffee, fresh. Figured you'd already made a pot, but..." He shrugged, a small, awkward smile on his face. "I can always use more," I said, taking it. Ben thrust his present into my hands. "I made it myself." I unwrapped. It was a birdhouse, made from scrap wood, nailed together with more enthusiasm than skill. It was perfect. It's for the garden, Ben said proudly. So the birds have a place to stay. I looked from the birdhouse to my son's hesitant face, to my grandson's proud one. The circle wasn't mended. The cracks would always be there, like the seams in a piece of well-loved pottery. But it was whole. It was strong. I have something for you, too, I said to Ben. I went to the table and brought back the wooden box. This is for you, for when you're older. But you can keep it here for now. He opened the lid, his eyes wide. He touched the compass, the journal, the key. He didn't understand it all, not yet, but he understood it was important. It was? His dot Josh looked over his shoulder, and his eyes met mine. In them, I saw the understanding pass between us. This was the real inheritance, not the money, not the land. The truth that we spent the day together. No fancy dinners, no performances. We ate simple food. We took the birdhouse out and nailed it to a tree in the garden, the snow falling around us. We were just 3 generations of men. Quiet, a little broken, but trying dot as the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and purple. Josh and Ben got ready to leave. Ben hugged me, the wooden box clutched tightly in his hand. I'll see you next weekend, Grandpa? You know where to find me, I said. Josh paused at the door. The foundation for the cabin. It'll be solid, Dad. I'll make sure of it. I know you will, I said. I stood on the porch and watched their truck disappear into the twilight. The snow continued to fall, covering their tracks, covering the past, promising a clean start. I went inside, closed the door, and latched. The house was warm, quiet, and finally, completely my own. I looked at Maria's portrait, leaning against the wall, at her smiling, youthful face. We did okay. Maria, I whispered to the empty room. We did okay. The quiet man's revenge was complete. It wasn't found in the ruin of others, but in the peace he built for himself. It wasn't in the noise of conflict, but in the silence of a snow-covered home, full of memory and hope. The war was over, and in its place, we had built a fragile, beautiful peace.